Well, needless to say, the weather has made it a very challenging 2019 for Hoosier farmers. A good example, the state's soybean crop. 650,000 fewer acres planted this year compared to 2018. Governor Holcomb is seeking federal disaster assistance for 88 of the state's 92 counties. For more, we return now to the Indiana State Fairgrounds and my conversation with Indiana State Department of Agriculture Director Bruce Kettler. Well, Bruce, here we are at the Indiana State Fair. Always a great time of year, and at least so far the weather has been pretty good.
It has.
From a State Department of Agriculture standpoint, talk about the importance. This is such an Indiana tradition, an iconic event each and every Sunday, but what does it mean to agriculture in general?
Well, you know, the important part of this to me is that the State Fair has continued to be a strong outlet, a strong advocate for the industry of agriculture. Obviously, many years ago, you know, it was a way, and we still exhibit animals and display our wares. But what I really like about what they're doing at the State Fair is the fact that they continue to educate people about where their food comes from, where their clothing comes from, even fuel. And that is really part of the mission of the State Fair, is to continue to do that. And it's not just during these 17 days of the State Fair, it's all year round. And it starts with young people. The State Fair is bringing young people in for classroom work in places like the Normandy Barn year round. Yep. And that education mission continues. And it's just maybe the focus is maybe slightly different, because we want to make sure that consumers know where their food comes from, how it's produced, how it's grown, how it's raised, and that continues to be a big part of the mission for the State Fair. Agriculture, the ag bioscience is such an important part of the Indiana economy, and unfortunately this year those spring rains and heavy rains later have really caused a lot of problems for farmers. Give us the latest. What, in your view, in terms of the impact you're maybe thinking it's going to have on the economy? Yeah, it's going to be real variable. As you drive around the state, you see some areas that look pretty decent. They're delayed. There's no doubt at least a month delayed, some cases even more than that. Crops are getting big enough where sometimes maybe you don't see all the problems necessarily. And there are areas of the state, you know, I would say generally speaking, northeast Indiana that had a lot of prevent planted. You get down into central Indiana the same way, through Boone, Hamilton, other parts of central Indiana, really impacted. Areas of southern Indiana that may have gotten crops planted, had crops up, and then when we got those couple of weeks of heavy rain in June, then they got floods. Yep. And they flooded crop that was already planted and really destroyed a lot of crop. So it's variable. There is no doubt there will be significant impact. We will have prevent planted acres, hopefully a good idea of what that is in Indiana in a couple weeks. So beyond the challenges with the spring rains and now dry conditions around the state, Mexico, trade relations, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. You were in Mexico with the Lieutenant Governor. Tell us the status of that agreement. Well, that we signed some letters of intent to work in the Mexican state of Hidalgo. We had really good discussions with Mexican officials, including the Mexican Secretary of Agriculture, and I felt really good about the mission. One thing that we found in doing these missions, you know, we can have these trade agreements, and which of course are negotiated at the federal level, and we need those to be able to set the ground rules. But people still do business with people. That relationship building is still a critical part of what we're doing with these missions, to be able to get business or maybe even the academic communities involved with their counterparts in these countries. We had some folks from Canada that came back in June, and we did more work on our Canada mission that we had from last fall. So we really think it's important to continue building those relationships. Once those agreements get signed, get passed, then we'll have a base to work from. Final question I want to ask you about, you've got a rural economic development initiative, and rural Indiana, some areas around the state are very challenged. Some are doing well, some not so well. Give us the thumbnail on that effort. Yeah, so we continued the rural economic development model. We rolled that out in February when we had the ag census data. That has continued to be very positive. In fact, we're really pleased with local economic development groups, what they're doing to look at the information they've got, find out what agriculture assets are in their areas and in their communities, and then work to put a plan together to build. And, you know, again, this is a way to be able to support farmers from a standpoint of they produce it. We want to have people that will be able to make sure we process it in the future.